everyone. Welcome to Intentional Guy. We're on air with John Jarman. He's got a book coming out, Broken and Redeemed, coming out. It's already on digital format. Is that correct, John?
Yes, sir. It's on Kindle and all ebook platforms as we speak.
Well, that's awesome. And then
Yeah.
I was just looking to where it's going to be out release in hardback or paperback in about 60 some days here.
Yeah, it'll be August 16th is when it'll hit the bookstores. So that's the official publication date. So,
Well, awesome. So looking forward to that. I've already started reading the online version a little bit and already hooked after just the first chapter with that. Very similar. I feel connected with it because I have a similar, well, I don't say similar story. I don't know everything yet, just as I go through it. But I spent the last 15 years finding restoration in my life.
mhm.
And that's how this ministry has gotten started, Intentional Guy. And God, I did something I didn't think I would ever do, and that was write a book. And I know I was reading yours on that. You know, it's definitely something you don't plan out doing.
No, no.
And I don't know if you did, but I sure struggled with my book because there's a lot of things God wanted me to share that I was like, no, I don't want to share that.
Well,
And
that's funny because I started writing back in 2014 is when I actually started this book, and I wrote about 5 chapters, and then I felt like I just didn't have. I don't know if it was the faith or there just something wasn't feeling right, and it actually sat on a shelf until February of last year, and I was prompted by the Holy Spirit to finish it, and I finished it in 4 weeks. It was just a complete spiritual dump. I finished 9 chapters in 4 weeks. So,
that's I experienced the same thing. It took me about 2 months to write my book
mhm.
because once I actually I was going to counseling and I was just writing my story out basically as part of my counseling thing. Next thing you know,
Yep.
um, I have a book, that
Hmm.
God put together, and I knew by halfway through that, oh, this is more than just me writing my story. I'm writing a book, aren't I, God? And I was kind of like,
What's the
you didn't
title of
tell me
your
this
book?
part. It's called Expose. It's called
Okay.
Expose.
All right. Nice.
So, but I want you to tell us if you would. I'm all about a good redemption story. All
Hmm.
about that. So I would love to hear. You shared just a little bit with us about this book that's coming out.
Yeah. I mean, it also, I grew up in a very violent uh, home. I don't have much of my memory of my childhood up until age 12. My dad was an alcoholic, very abusive. For a long time in my life, I thought I escaped the abuse. It wasn't until I was working with my counselor here in Tacoma that I realized that I was not only a part of it, but I was a victim of it. And that was a turning point. That was a hard thing to swallow then because you didn't know. But the shame and the guilt and the bitterness that you carry with you for years and years and years, it affects your life, and it affects your work, your relationships, everything. And when I moved back home into Seattle, the Northwest, I should say, it was 2005, and I started seeing self-destructive behavior again, and so I sought out counseling. And with Christina's help over the next 10 years, on and off counseling, I was able to work with her and my spiritual mentor and free myself of all that stuff. And so that was the good part of it. She was the one that told me to write the book. And she goes, "You need to write a book." And I kind of laughed at her during that counseling session. And then I talked to a few friends and told them a little bit about it. And they go, "Yeah, you need to write a book." And so 7 years after the start of the book, it was completed, and here we are talking about it. And I would have never imagined even 2 years ago, if you would have said I wrote a book and it was a faith-based novel, I would be speaking the gospel, I would have said there's no way. So
Yeah, yeah, and I resonate with that shame and guilt.
mhm.
Man, it's just a paralyzing uh, thing. It's something you said in your book is I that I resonate too is we seem to think that we're the only one that has these problems,
Yes.
you know? And that's where the enemy, I think, gets us a lot of times, is he can paralyze us with those thoughts. And,
Right.
um, and that was a trap for me for many years. I've said often shame and guilt were my best friends,
Mm-hmm.
through that time. Um, but intentional guy was brought up because I found that what I pour into myself is so important, because for so
Yep.
long what one of my problem was pouring the wrong things into my life, and so now I have a choice, a decision to make, and the choice is mine. um, the choice is mine. And you said something in your book. It says, you were quoting someone that said, God didn't give us a choice to be created, but he does give us a choice to follow him, something along that line.
Oh yeah, that's AJ Swoboda. He's one of my favorite authors. He said that God didn't create us, or He created us without our permission, but He will not save us with He. Hold on, He created us without our permission. He will not save us without our consent.
Yes.
So, so
And, you know, along the way on this journey for 15 years, I thought God was far from me as I was
hmm
writing my book. And this is the funny part, because as I was writing the book is when I really realized that God was right there next to me each step of the way, sending people to me, the
yeah,
right
yeah,
people.
yep. Yeah, the whole, I mean, and then that happened for me too, Michael, to be honest, as I was, writing down the book, and you're looking back on your life, and you start to see where God was in your life, even when you didn't even know him, because I didn't grow up in the church. I had no idea of, Christ or anything. The only concept of Jesus that I got was when I visited my grandmother in Arkansas, and she would say, John, she'd go, Johnny, God's got something special planned for you. And I know my grandmother's smiling from heaven right now, because she knew about the book already.
Right.
But it goes, somebody's praying over your life even though you don't know it. And that helped a ton, because it wasn't until I got into my later, my mid-adult years, where I even looked at church or Christ. And then I started going to church, and it started to sink in a little more and more and more. But it's the sanctification is a long journey. And that's what new Christians need to understand. Your salvation is immediate, but the sanctification takes a little bit of time, and it takes some work. And going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where we think we're the only ones, we part of that, I think, is it's the shame and the guilt, but it's also, you need to learn how to be vulnerable and let people understand what you're going through. And I think it's harder for men, because we're supposed to be this tough exterior, and we're supposed to be, it's just the society we live in. And the vulnerability part of it was the biggest thing for me. And when I actually became humbled and vulnerable, that's when I started to see who I was, not only in Christ, but where I made mistakes along the way, and was able to hopefully rectify all those. So
Yes, I agree with it. I think, my pastor told me, I met with him last week. Me and him sat down. He was like, and he introduced me to two men I didn't know in the church. And he was like, that Mike was one of the most broken people uh, I've seen when he came to church there, which
mhm.
I was. I had more shame on me than probably someone he had seen in a while. And I want to talk about the first part of of the name of your book. It's called Broken and Redeemed. I want to talk
Mhm.
about the broken part right now,
Mhm.
because I know what that means to be broken.
Mhm.
Um, and but people have heard my broken story. On your brokenness, how far did that take you?
Oh, I mean, I was, adolescence. I was into drugs, alcohol. I was selling drugs, and up until age 23 when I joined the Marine Corps. And then it just, obviously the drugs had to stop because I went in the Marine Corps. So, that was a blessing. But if I wouldn't have joined the Marine Corps, I probably would have been dead or in jail. And then, going through that, and then just, the brokenness that I talk about in the book after the Marine Corps is basically the decisions I made in my life that weren't the right decisions that affected other people. I was a football coach, and I look back on my career, and if I was the man of God that I am now, who knows would have been different. But you can't change the past, and I think I went through the things I went through to get to this point, and that's it was a rough time, and you look back on all that, and you see that, and that's where some of the shame and guilt come from, because you I don't want to say it's intentional, because you don't really understand what you're doing. And that's not freeing me of any mistake I made. It's just, you don't get the correlation between your brokenness and what you're doing in your life. And that's the tough part of it. So,
Yeah.
and you don't see that until you start counseling.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great point right there, because, I come from a background where a lot of people shy away from counseling. Like, it's like you have a lack of faith in God. Why can't you do this? And I'll be honest, I would not be where I am today had it not been for the godly counsel that God gave to me. And I got to tell you,
Right.
in my journey, in my 15 years, I didn't have all great counselors when it first
Oh, no,
happened.
neither did I. Yeah.
I had there
Yeah.
were some crazy counselors that
Mhm.
told me some stuff that was just
Yeah.
off the wall,
Mhm.
but I'm going to tell you, for me, the counseling is what finally put the stuff together for me, because the guilt and shame and the brokenness that was so tight on me, I needed someone to help me navigate that, because I had a lot of head
Correct.
knowledge
Mhm.
about God and his forgiveness and all this, but applying it to myself,
Right.
because I felt like I should be punished. I felt like I wasn't worthy enough. All sorts of different things in that,
Mhm.
But uh, I want you, if you wouldn't mind, speaking up a little bit on the council, because I have already, since I started this podcast, our podcast has only been a couple months into going, and I've already been encouraging several people who, there's no shame in going
Oh,
to godly
absolutely.
counsel.
Yep.
And in fact, it's
And
what people face. They need that.
yeah, and the thing about the counseling is it allows you to speak freely and without judgment, and talk about what you're feeling, because some of the stuff that people go through, they don't want to share with everybody,
No.
because of the shame of what they went through. And if you're in a dark, lonely place and dark place, then seek it out. If it's a pastor, somebody who's just even farther along in their faith, or a professional counselor, any of those, or a
Yeah.
combination. Because I used a combination. My counselor really wasn't a Christian counselor, but she respected my faith enough to work with me. And then I was, by the grace of God, at the church I was attending, I found Scotty Kessler, who ended up being my spiritual mentor. And so then I worked with him as well. And so it's either or it's both. It's a combination of both, because you have to have that person who you can be truly honest with, and then you have to have somebody who's further along in your walk, or their walk, than you are, to help guide you through the faith part of it, so that you can understand. I mean, it says biblically, we go through our trials to help those who are going through trials. And so, and that's what we're doing right now, Michael, is hopefully we're helping somebody who's in that trial through both our books and your podcast. I mean, this is a way that hopefully reach somebody and help them see that there isn't any shame about doing that, and that they should seek that out. I mean, last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I spent a lot of time talking about that on some other podcasts, because the stigma of mental health, we somehow got to figure out how to remove that.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially as Christians, uh, God has given us some good resources to
Yeah.
help us navigate some of this. So why not use it? But sometimes uh, others in my past have put that burden on me that, made me feel less than for needing that counseling, which I should have got it, because for me, the counseling was what I found out the last 2 years, why the counseling was so crucial was, and I know this is for you as well, as I was reading your book, is that there was things that happened in my childhood that I never addressed. Nobody,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, in my family knew that I had been molested by a missionary until I wrote this book,
Right.
because I could never dealt with that before. But
Correct.
then once I got into counseling and we started dealing, and I remember the day that I unburdened that and spoke it. It was freeing in itself a little
Yep.
bit because I
Yep.
I didn't realize how much that cloak of shame was on that specific moment. Because to be
Right.
honest with you, I'd blocked that out of my life,
Hmm.
but I didn't realize how that dictated so many bad choices and
Yes.
decisions that I made uh, because of what happened in my life.
Right. And you would have never shared that with anybody else but your counselor.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
my counselor
exactly.
calls it peeling away the onion.
Yep.
Because you got to kind of peel it away, and if you've ever peeled the onion, it starts to get a little stinkier as you get to the center,
Yes,
and
exactly.
and so you've got to. I call that the messy part of Christianity, because it's self-examination, because you just have to start looking inside of yourself, and working through all that. But I don't have, my traumatic situation is different because I have no recollection of memory. And we tried to do some memory recovery, and it became demonic during the counseling
Mm,
session. So we left it alone, because I didn't want to go there at that point, because
right.
recovering my memory is going to be more traumatic than not knowing it all. And so, we left it there, and it's a tough thing, because when I first started counseling, I really wanted to know what happened. But now it's, God gave me the peace. I don't need to know. And if he wants me to know, he'll let me to know. So,
And that's the whole key right there. You said God gave you the peace. That's why we went to
hmm,
counseling for, anyways, to
yep,
get
yep,
get that peace from God, which I heard people talk about before. I thought I had peace before. I've
hmm,
never understood joy in Christ until
yep.
I was free from this brokenness that I had.
Well, I think that comes with learning who you are in Christ too, though, because I mean, we have to understand that the victory's been won, and we have to start believing what we read in the Bible. I had a friend at the beginning of this year. He texted me and he said, "If you believe everything you read, why aren't you believing the Bible?" And I went, "Oh, that's my mantra for the year." Because it's and some people read the Bible, but do you believe what you read? Do you actually believe what it says about you in the Bible? And
Right.
and when you start to read it and you start to implement it into your life, and you start to try to abide by what the Bible said, that's when the veil gets lifted. That's when you start seeing things differently. And that's where the redemption comes from, in my opinion. So at
Oh,
least that was
oh
for
yeah,
me. So
yes. And what a hard road it is. And that's
yeah.
where intentional guy came from for me because um, being intentional in my walk and my growth, I've got a choice to make,
Yep.
you know. And I was at a crossroad. Which way do I want to go? And
Hmm.
the choice is mine. An intentional guy came out of that. I am intentional guy. That's what the minute
Right.
I realized that my life is my ministry and God. My identity in Christ was so warped, and my identity was wrapped around all these horrible events in my life and all these
Hmm.
failures, and not who God had made me to be. And let me tell you, that's not something you can just unravel in a
New.
day. You
Nope.
know, it's taken me a long journey
Yep.
to get to that place, but a journey that was well worth the hike,
Yes.
to get to this with it.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. We've been down a pretty similar path, brother.
yeah. Well, I want to ask you this,
Hmm.
because there's a forgiveness. You
Hmm.
know, for me, forgiveness. First, it was really hard to forgive myself.
Hmm.
I think that was one of the biggest battles I had was forgiving myself, and that's where shame plays in, right? Um,
Hmm.
but then forgiveness from other people, because not everyone has forgiven me for my past,
Right.
and that that is a hard burden because the enemy will try to use that to paralyze you again.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn that I can only be responsible for where I am now and try to take
Correct.
responsibility and follow the path God's given me now. I can't take away yesterday. but I
Correct.
can make better choices today
Correct.
with that. And how have you battled that with people?
Well, the forgiveness for people who've transgressed against me is that part of it took a long time for me to do that as well, and forgiving myself. There was times in my life where up until probably 2016 I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror because I didn't like what I saw looking back. And now I can face myself, and because of that forgiveness. And I think you learn that the more you study the Bible, and you realize that what God did for you, and he forgave us. When you ask someone for forgiveness that you've committed a transgression against or a sin, it's up to, they don't have to say they forgive you. We've asked for it, and we can pray for it, but we have to understand that we are forgiven in God's eyes from that transgression. And that's where we go forward from. And you're right, it doesn't release the event. All it does is it releases the weight of the event and the shame and the guilt of the event. So,
Right.
because you can't change what took place. And that's the biggest thing. And that's the toughest part of forgiveness. And it's I don't even know what else to say on that. That's the tough part of Christianity. So
It is. It is.
especially when you've been abused, whether sexually, physically, or emotionally. That's the toughest part, because the wounds are deep, and it's a tough thing to say that I forgive that person, but we have to,
Yeah.
so.
And I had a whole chapter in my book on that because I realized that was God. I had a problem with someone, and God's like, "You're not willing to forgive this person, but yet you
Mm-hmm.
want others to forgive you." And it was,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, now I know why this whole event happened with this
Right.
person, was because
Right.
God was teaching me a lesson
Yep.
that I needed to learn so I could pass it on. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
um, but forgiveness is that's that's a tough pill on all avenues to swallow sometimes, and a humbling one as well. It's a
Yep.
humbling thing to go to someone and confess you've done wrong towards them, and you want an answer forgiveness. It's humbling, to experience. And then I can tell you that it's heartbreaking when it's not accepted as well. But you know that's not your journey, that's theirs, and
Well, and
takes
Michael,
time.
yeah, it is. It takes time and it's heartbreaking, but you hope, if the person, hopefully that strengthens that person's faith, because they see what you're trying to do, and you're trying to make amends, and you're trying to do some things, and it's something that your future behavior patterns, hopefully they will see that you're who you are, and they'll come around to it. That's
Yeah.
all I pray for. Is they hope that that hope is seen, and they go, okay, he is, because if you've wronged somebody, they're going to wait and see what you're going to be like in the next 5 years, 10 years,
Yeah.
and hopefully it doesn't take that long, but they're going to wait and see, and they're going to watch it. And that's where we have to walk the walk.
Yeah.
And that's the part we've accepted now. And it's it's an awesome thing. I love what I do now, is when I'm sitting here talking, gospel and
Yeah.
God. It's amazing. And there's no way I would have thought I was doing this. So quick story is I entered seminary in 2017. I wanted to get deeper into the word. So I went to Faith Seminary here in Tacoma, and I'm 8 hours shy of a master's of theology. And when I started school, everybody's like, "You going to become a preacher?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just doing it for my knowledge, because I wanted to go
Right.
deeper into the word." And, that helped me finish the book. But, in a sense, I am preaching, because I'm talking the
Right.
gospel a lot. But, being an ordained minister, no. But I'm going to share my story, because that's what God asked me to do. And I'm going to talk about it. So,
Right. Well, and I got rid of titles a long time ago. Well, I lost them and everything that happened to me, but
mm-hmm.
then I've also started, like, I don't need a label
Right.
on me. I just need who Christ has made me to be. And that's where my focus has been now, is trying to be
Right.
that person God wants and has created me to be. And I'll be honest, that journey is a daily journey. Every day I'm
Yep.
learning new things in in that walk. But I learned that I have to be very purposeful in that mission,
Yes.
because something I say a lot is the reason why I want to be intentional today is because the enemy is very intentional at getting me today. And so I have to be more intentional than the enemy is, because he would love to
I
see
like
me
that.
fall
Yeah.
back into where I was before.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
um, let me ask you this. Uh,
Hmm.
we talked about the broken part. Now I want to talk about the redeemed part.
Hmm.
You know, uh, what does that feel like?
Oh, it's the subtitle of my book. It's Freedom Through Complete Surrender. And it really wasn't until 2016 when I completely gave up control, because I used to be a control freak, because I controlled everything in my life
Right.
from age 12. And that was the toughest thing for me to do, was give up complete control, because even in my earlier walk and my mid walk, as I started to develop my faith, I still wanted things on John's time. And obviously they didn't work out. And then when I gave up control and really sat back and just said, God, it's in your hands, watching the things that he did have been amazing. And the biggest amazement is this book, because he the Spirit spoke to me in February of last year through Hebrews 10:36, and it says, when you're doing the will of God, you must persevere to get what he promised. And then an hour later, I'm reading in AJ Swoboda's very first book. He's talking about the will of God, and he said, no one told me if anybody would read my book or buy my book. I just had to write it. And as soon as I read those two things came to me within an hour. I went, okay, I got to finish my book. And so 4 weeks later, the book was done. I was talking to my spiritual mentor. I said, hey, do you know anybody that's an editor? Well, he had a friend that used to work in prayer ministry with him. So he got me in contact with Arlene. We started doing the editing process. She told me she's a scout from Morgan James Publishing. September of last year, I get an acceptance letter. February of this year, the book's actually in my hands. And in August, it's going to be in a bookstore. Now, tell me that's not God's will. That's not God's hand in that.
Yeah.
And sitting back and just watching this, it's just been, one, humbling, two, surreal, and just that I have other stories. When we closed down because I used to own a training gym. When we closed down the gym, just trying to get out of our lease, doing things because COVID closed us, and so we wouldn't have to lose a lot of money, and just watching God's hand and all of that has just been amazing, because I just went, it's in your hands. I'm going to trust you. I'm not going to worry about anything. And I tell friends now that I don't worry, and they're like, what? You don't worry at all? And I'm like, no, I just pray about it, and I don't worry about outcomes. It's going to happen. And whatever road he takes me down, that's where I'm going to go. So,
Yeah.
and that's
And I
the freedom, so.
Well, and you're right, because that is very similar to what I experienced, because uh, once I was redeemed, and once I stopped fighting God and I gave into
Mm-hmm.
the process,
Right.
um, it's like right now I'm sitting back just enjoying the ride, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't really have to do a lot. God is doing it all.
Yep.
And the amazing thing for me has been how it's affected my family and seen my life. And you're a coach. So me and my wife this year, we went on a journey and we have lost 160 pounds between the two of us,
Awesome.
you know,
Awesome.
and it's funny, we got intentional in God, and then all this other areas of our life that you
Yep.
would think is not a spiritual thing, right? God starts affecting. And so our
Mm-hmm.
health has gotten better. Our joy is just grown tremendously. And
Right.
that's what it means to be redeemed and to be
Yep.
restored. And it was so great, because for many years, I told myself, my mantra was, I hate me. Every day I got up
Right.
and I said, I hate you.
Right.
And that was my self-talk to me. And that was
Yep.
daily.
Yep.
And now to be rid of that, a year ago, I
Yep.
remember
Yep.
sitting in with my counselor and was able to process that. And from that day forward, I've never said it.
Right.
I
Right.
it's gone. God, I've been delivered from that, and
Yep.
that's the amazing thing with being redeemed and
Yep.
deliverance. And I know some people are listening to us, and I'd like your thoughts on this. Some people,
Hmm.
maybe you've not been so broken like we have, but does that mean you still? But do you feel the joy that we're talking about being redeemed?
I hope they do, because everybody's broken. I mean, we're all born into it. Paul talks about it in Romans, that we're all born into it. It's natural, and so whether you've grown up in the church, there's parts of you that are if you really look deep in yourself, you'll probably see. Um, but experience and as you were talking, Michael, my thought was, the people that are out there that are listening to us, the control part, because you said once you surrendered to the process, once I gave up complete control, those are the two keys, because you have to give up that self-controlling ego pride and become vulnerable to allow God to work, because then you can start seeing the word better, you can start seeing evidence in your
Yeah,
life. And so if you're listening and you're like, yeah, you guys are just talking, no, give it up. That's the step you got to take, and it's tough. And that's why I always suggest to find a spiritual mentor, because that person's going to be able to help you guide you through that. But when you do, and you walk out on the redemption side of it, and the title of my book, Broken, there's two sides of brokenness. There's the brokenness of what you and I went through being victims of abuse, but there's also
right.
the beauty side of broken, what God does to break you down so that you can become who he wants you to be. And that's the beautiful side of broken. And that goes hand in hand with this book. And it's just because he broke me down, and he had to, because I was stubborn. So
That was me.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I can say today, which I never thought this would ever come. I never thought this would come, but today I can sit here and say I am so thankful for all the. I mean, I would never want to go through that pain again,
Correct.
but I am grateful for that, because God had to take me where He
Yep.
did
Yep.
to get me to where I am, and there's
Well,
just no way
and
around.
I don't want people to think that God intentionally made you a victim, because I think
Right,
that's the evilness of the world. But you came through it because of your willingness to succumb to the fact that you are a child of God.
right,
Because the evil in the world is not God made. He doesn't kill. He doesn't allow stuff like this to happen. It's the demonic side of the faith and the walk. Because I mean, Paul talks about it in Ephesians. We're battling an invisible war, and
yeah,
so it's the we were victims of evil, but
right,
we were able to get over. We were able to overcome that through our relationship and our growth in Christ.
yeah,
So.
and the takeaway for me was not letting that what happened to me control me anymore, and my decisions
Correct.
and my choices,
Correct.
because the unforgiveness in my life came from the bad choices and decisions I made, not
Right.
what was perpetrated upon me.
Right.
And I have a responsibility of taking. I could either be a victim or a victor. What
Well,
do I
but see,
want to
you
be?
said it best. You used to wake up and say, I hate myself. Now you wake up and you say, I love myself, because you know what God's love is. And so you've seen that different side of it. And you know that you are a valued person, where you used to think you weren't valued. I was the same way. And because of the love that Jesus Christ had for us to hang on the cross, we can now accept ourselves, even though we were victims. We don't have to be victims any longer. And we have that freedom. And it's a peaceful thing for somebody like you and I that have gone through what we have been. So because we see ourselves as a value rather than
Yes.
a victim. And that's the way I like to explain it. So
Yep. And this is so good for me to talk to someone who has gone down some of the same road, and be
mm-hmm.
to be able to express some of it. Gives me joy, because
Yeah, yeah.
for the longest time my problem was I never saw it um, uh, illustrated to me how someone could be redeemed.
Correct.
That was from my situation. I never saw an example of restoration. I mean, I've seen someone restored from different things, but nothing so. as bad as what I had done,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And now I get to be that. I remember I was going to be a missionary to Albania, and I went over there, and this is right during the midst of some terrible things that happened to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt like God couldn't use me. And there was an orphanage over there. They wanted me to work with some of the teenage boys there, and teenagers
Mm-hmm.
there, because I had experience in youth work and youth pastor and stuff like that. Well, I got there and I went into their dormitory, and on all their walls they had all these people. Now it was really weird because they had like Stephen Curtis Chapman up there, and then they had the cathedrals there, and then they had Jeremy Camp, and then Kirk
Right.
Pally or something like that
Right.
up there,
Right.
And I remember looking at none of the genre came together, and so I was like, now here I am in my time thinking, feeling bad for some. God can never use me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I look at these young boys and I ask them, so tell me about these posters, I'm like, so you like which music is it that you like,
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, they looked at me and they said, we don't know their music.
Mm.
We just know that they're men of God and we
Wow.
want to
Okay.
be like that.
Oh,
And
wow.
all of a
Okay.
sudden God spoke to me and said, Mike, you can be more than a picture.
Yeah.
You can be more of a picture. You can be a
Nice.
living example, and
Yep.
it was life changing
Right. Right.
in that
Yeah.
time. And we take for granted, that how we can help other people.
Mm-hmm.
The enemy will try to paralyze us, but God has a story for us. And I want to ask you this in closing here today.
Mm-hmm.
Tell, if you would, in your journey, what's one of your favorite part about the journey that you've been on, or moment that you can share with us?
Well, the best part is just the freedom itself. When I felt that morning when I gave up control, and just the weight of the world. But one of my favorite parts of the book is I got to meet Bart Millard, the lead singer for Mercy Me, because my last chapter of the book is called Dear Younger Me, and I used that song that's one of their songs, and because the song when they released it really spoke to me, and to be able to sit and listen and share testimony with Bart, because he grew up a lot like us. He was abused.
Right.
If you've seen the movie I Can Only Imagine,
I have.
well, he was telling me that story in 2015. I don't even know if he thought the movie was going to be made in that 2015.
Right.
And so we shared our testimony, and I asked him. I said, what prompted you to write this song? And he said, my counselor told me to write a song to my son as if I was writing it to my dear younger self. And I went, well, that's good. My counselor told me to write a book, and I want to use your song in my book. Do I have your permission? And he said, yes. And he goes, I got one condition. I'd like a copy of the book when you get it done. And I said, okay. And let's see, probably 3 months ago, I sent a copy to his agent in Tennessee. I'm hoping that he's got it. I'm just waiting to see, that I'm hoping that he reaches out to me, because he has my email and everything when he's done reading the book. And, that'll be a true blessing if that takes place. But that's one of my favorite parts of my walk, because just to see God's hand in putting the two of us together backstage in a auditorium here in Washington, I call them God things, and that was a God thing. So
Sure was.
So,
and the incredible thing is, just because your book is written and being released now doesn't mean the story is over.
correct.
It's just the healing. Once we're healed, it's like the freedom brings now more than a new chapter, whole new book for us. That we're getting.
Well, I've actually outlined a book already, and I'm working on. I mean, it's the outline is done. So as soon as I get this book launched, I'm going to start writing the second book. So
that's awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear.
So,
well, listen, I want to encourage our listeners to go get the book. You have a website, right? What's your website?
It's brokenandredeemed.com. The book is available there, or you can, like we said earlier, it's on Kindle. If you go to any of the other bookstores, if you want to order a paperback, you're gonna have to wait till August 16th. You can pre-order it, but it wouldn't be shipped to you until August 16th. So,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being on here. I'm excited about finish reading it and everything with it. And I thank you for coming on here. I'll make sure that we have a link in there for anyone that wants to go to your website or go buy the book. I'll put a couple of the links in there where we can find them. But John, thank you
and give
so
me
much.
thank you for having me, and I really appreciate our conversation. Give me the name of your book again. I want to look it up.
My name is it's Exposed.
Exposed. Okay, and
Yeah.
it's on
And you
Kindle
can
or
it is on
okay,
Audible and paperback. And you
okay,
could go to intentionalguy.com and
okay.
you can get a link to it from there. But
Awesome, awesome.
I have enjoyed this conversation today. I'm excited about this airing because it's good to it's always good to hear a redeeming story, and
Absolutely,
God's work, because that just
absolutely.
brings hopefully hope to someone who's listening today. Like you say it about your book. I was reading in it where even if it only affects and helps one person,
One
and that's
person.
more than
Yep,
just a saying, because if you've been through some of the valleys, it really is worth it. It makes
yep.
everything you've gone through worth it to some
Absolutely,
degree.
absolutely.
So, well, thank you, John, for being on here. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. Until next time, just keep being intentional.